morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone from Doha. A warm welcome for those who are returning from day one. I saw a couple of you in the chat already, and a special welcome to our new audience. Welcome to day two of our event, Moving Forward, Rebuilding a More Just and Equitable Education Future, co-organized with USC Rossier School of Education. Today's session will focus on innovation, and in particular, how we can foster innovation to build more just and equitable education system. My name is Audrey Jacomini, and I'm the manager of the Innovation for Quality and Access track at WISE. Every day, I feel blessed and inspired to be working with innovators from around the world who are pushing boundaries to deliver quality education to all. I'm delighted to be your MC today to help you transition from various segments of this event. Let me start with some housekeeping items first. I have the pleasure to inform you that you can follow the keynotes today through our sign language interpreter and also through our automated captioning feature. Also, as you may see, you have a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. There will be no time for Q&A with our keynote speakers. However, we really encourage you to stay engaged and to post in our chat some comments and some questions, and we'll do our best to refer to them throughout the event. As you know, after our opening keynote, there will be 8 options of interactive workshops to attend, which you will access with a different link that will be shared shortly. In the meantime, please keep the confirmation link to the main session, so the one that you use to access this session, handy. They are personalized links, so you will need them to come back to the main session when the workshops are done. The workshops will be hands-on activities led by USC Rossier doctoral students with tangible takeaways for all participants. The detailed description of the workshop is available on our website, but we will also go through them soon after the keynote. For those who would like to post on our social media, please use hashtag equity in education as you tweet or post about today. Our handles are also at wise_tweets and at USC Rossier. As I onboard you on the topic that we will discuss today, please answer the polls that you will see appearing on your screen. We always like to know a bit more about your audience, about our audience, and we also want to hear your point of view. Where are you joining us from? I saw already a couple of comments in the chat: Uganda, Paris, Philippines, Greece. We want to know more. But also, what is your role in the education system? And finally, what is your stake on innovation? Sorry, what will push innovation? We'll come back to it later during the break, so please answer the poll. And the theme of today's session, Fostering Innovation to Build More Just and Equitable Education System, really reflects on the idea that the current crisis has required educational system and communities within them to be creative and agile in response to dramatic changes. They have, in many ways, risen to the challenge, but much more work remains. The focus of today is on sharing and creative, innovative strategy that will build on this principle and hold promise for helping education emerge stronger and more equitable for all. On this note, and with no further introduction, I would like to welcome WISE Director of Programs and Chief Curator, Amina Hussein, for some introductory remarks. Amina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for the introduction. Good afternoon from Doha and Assalamu alaikum. A warm welcome for our speakers, guests, and participants who are joining us from across the globe, and those who have been with us yesterday. Welcome to day 2 of this unique and exciting collaboration between USC Rossier School of Education and WISE. My name is Amina Hussein. I'm the Director of Programs and Chief Curator at WISE. I'm also a proud alumna of Rossier. I'm honored to be here with you all today. As I mentioned yesterday in my opening remarks, this event was sparked by the long-standing relationship between our 2 organizations. And now we are happy that together we bring this community of educators and education leaders to examine global education policy responses to the pandemic. We will be discussing insights on equity amidst disruption through a range of interactive workshops led by Rossier's doctorate students. Our theme titled Moving Forward, Rebuilding a More Just and Equitable Educational Future points to the opportunity before us in the present moment to think deeply and creatively about changes that are needed to help education systems emerge from the crisis stronger than before. Current disruptions are exacerbating long-standing inequities. This calls for new policies and practices that can increase access and outcomes for all. The current turmoil is also revealing new insights and possibilities about how education might operate differently and more effectively. This opens the door for bold and innovative ideas about ways to improve the educational experience of every student. Yesterday, we focused on the theme using crisis as an opportunity to enact more equitable policies and practices. A crisis alone, as you know, is not enough to bring about needed changes in education. Instead, we need leaders who understand what is happening, leaders who are able to develop plans, and leaders who are ready to build support to implement new ideas. And as Dean Noguera from Rossier School of Education mentioned yesterday in his keynote remarks, we don't have to wait for policy to change to begin providing students with the education they will need for the future. In that context, we had around 8 interactive workshops that ranged in topics covering teacher training, employability skills, higher education, and accessibility, to list a few, all in the context of the pandemic. Today, we will focus on fostering innovation to build a more just and equitable education systems. Systems have in many ways risen to the challenge, but much work remains and is needed. The questions that underpin the sessions today will include what emerging ideas from the current crisis globally can be harnessed for the future, and how can we empower new voices, communities, and partnerships to innovate towards more just and equitable education systems. Toward the end of my speech, I would like to remind you of 4 C's that we have mentioned yesterday, and I hope that they will be guiding values for you during the discussions. Number 1 is courage. So let us dare to be open to new ideas and possibilities and challenge each other. I believe courage is what you do when you do not know. Number 2 is commitment. Commit by being present, by engaging in the discussions, and by taking the work forward beyond this forum. Number 3 is collaboration. We are all united by our passion for education. Let us collaborate beyond boundaries. As Helen Keller said, together we can do so much. And I'm adding a 4th C that Dean Noguera stressed yesterday, and that is creativity. We need to be creative and agile in our response to the dramatic changes and uncertainties that we are all going through. I hope that through this forum, we will contribute to building a better hope and future for our learners. I wish you all a fruitful and enjoyable discussion. Thank you. And the floor is yours, Audrey.
Thank you very much, Amina, and thank you for reminding us about the power of the 4 C's. Now we'll move on to our first keynote for today, Dr. Muzimbi Kanyoro. Our keynote speaker is globally recognized for leadership of organizations and initiatives that advance health, development, and human rights. She's passionate advocate for education and for women and girls, and believes that investing in women leadership creates sustainable change. She is currently the chair of UWC International Board, the governing body of United World College, a global education movement that makes education a force to unite people, nations, and culture for peace and sustainable future. Dr. Kanyoro, welcome, and the floor is yours. We are looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely pleased to be with you in this forum, and I'm talking to you from Nairobi, Kenya, where it is 7:10 in the morning, in the evening. I come to you to this subject of education with different types of experiences. The first job I did after university was to teach in a high school, and I bring that experience. I trained in university to come back and teach linguistics at university students, something that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I left that teaching post to work in international organizations where I have come to realize and to know and to say that education happens formally and informally. Education happens in secular and in religious forums. Education happens in academic institutions as well as in community. So when we think of education, I often say we cannot just look in one area, say institutions alone, institutions being composed of schools and colleges and other tertiary institutions that we use for practical education. We have to think about how people acquire knowledge, including from the communities from which they live. Today, you've asked me to speak about the gender gap in education. And that's an area that really gives me opportunity to imagine the things that I know about gender, because that is the work that I have been doing for the last 3 decades. So when we talk about closing the gender gap in education, I wonder what comes present in your mind's eyes. Big questions for me can this indeed be done? What would it take to achieve the gender gap? What images does the phrase gender education gap bring to each one of you who are attending this seminar? Perhaps a young girl carrying a big pot of water on her head while her brother runs to school on a cold morning. Perhaps a child bride or a teen mother who you could mistake for a sister looking after her younger sibling, and yet it is her own child. Or perhaps that physics class or mathematics class where you have 48 boys and 2 girls. Does the situation get better in later years of education? I want to say no, because I have looked at the area of education, both at tertiary level and in universities. And while we have a better situation in the beginning years of students, especially where laws enhance the fact that all children need to have an education, the higher you go, the more you find that there is a big gap between boys and girls and between what subjects they study. Sometimes this is built on very early distinctions that begin even before the children are born. Discrimination is real in many societies. Harassment happens, and girls sometimes cannot be able to complete their studies because of harassment. Biases shapes the behavior of both other students, teachers, and even those who create syllabus. There is institutional racism that exists that keeps some students not able to participate and give the best of themselves, as we had yesterday from the keynote speaker from Brazil. Intersectionality exists for us to see that these things, these barriers that cause the gaps do not exist singly, but they are connected to each other. And to achieve equality that will lead towards being able to diminish the gender gap, because I don't know when we can really eradicate it, we need to address a lot of things, including misogyny that exists in society, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, etc. And we need to create models that people see in society that help them to value women and to see what women do as bringing common good to the whole society. Currently, we only have like 10% of senior leaders in the world are women. Many employees think that women are well represented in leadership, when in reality they remain a minority, because often people do not see the statistics of everything to see where the distinctions and the gaps exist. Nearly 50% of men think that women are well represented in organizations because they see some women, especially today. And very often, the perception of seeing one or two women in a place closes or close people. They see women for as long as there is one or two there. They see women, and often they do not think in representations of percentages, even though we know that women make up 50% of total populations. These unconscious biases make men who often are in leadership position in majority much less committed to gender equality that would lead us to see how it impacts school-going children from the beginning. So let's really focus a little bit more about to school-going children. First of all, it's been proven over and again that when girls and women are educated, a lot of good happens to society. Child mortality drops by 10%. Risk of contracting illnesses drops by half because a lot of women have access to children and are caretakers. And once they have gone through an education, that bridging of illiteracy accesses them information that is able to provide them with the ability to access what keeps people healthy and alive. We've also got enough data to back up the fact that where women get an education, they delay their marriage, they delay their childbearing. And this in turn also impacts on maternal mortality. As many of us know that a lot of adolescent death happens when young girls give birth when they are not developed enough for them to give birth. So I could give several other reasons to the power of education, but those just suffice to say that education is important. And we often describe education as the one gift that you can give to someone, to a boy or a girl, a man or a woman, that cannot be taken away from them. It's a gift that they can own and use that gift by themselves. When you give property directly, that can be taken away from them. And we've seen it in terms of inheritance. We've seen women be part of families, but when the man dies, they are disinherited. So property is not really the answer to giving women equality in the society. Yet we know that when we look at education, we still do not have the kind of picture that we would want to give in terms of women. I could result another litany of terrible facts that show how women are still significantly disadvantaged in all areas of life and how this impacts on education. But it's much better to underscore that major studies over time have provided sufficient evidence that when a girl and a woman are educated, the whole society benefits. And not giving education to women, continuing to support a gap of the education of women, actually undermines the sustainable development and any development that we want to make in our societies. So let me go to a few areas where I can give some examples of what I think we could do that can be innovative as we face the futures that might be different from where we are coming, but also building on what we know. For indeed, innovation is simply being able to do something that we know better, or being able to increase or do something differently using whatever resources and knowledge that we have today. Travel with me to some parts of the world and let's see some examples. Let's start with Palestine, where I want you to meet Delilah. Delilah is a young woman now in her 20s. She was raised in a refugee camp in Bethlehem. In 2007, when she was about 15 years old, she was offered a scholarship to study at UWC, United World Colleges, Atlanta in the United Kingdom. And it's one of the 18 schools of the United World Colleges. She never thought she would be able to access such opportunity to have a quality education. And here I want specifically to speak about quality education. In her words, it's very hard for us as Palestinians to get access to high quality education. Today, she leads a youth program of Action Aid Palestine and has been appointed a global ambassador for the Save Our Future campaign run by the Education Commission. What is innovative about this? Here are some things that I think are innovative. If we want to provide universal education and also address the gaps that exist for various people, we have to enable people to have opportunities, because most people can access and use the education that they have, but often access is a problem. Here, access means also access for people who are displaced, people who are marginalized, people who are on the move, especially those people who are on the move due to conflicts, not a choice of their own, people who are on the move due to climate change, due to urbanization, and several other causes. These people are often marginalized, and when they have education, it's often not quality education. By using the example of Delilah, I do not mean to say every education that is quality needs to be achieved by people traveling from the south to the north, or the west to the east to the west, or from refugee camps to other places. But I think one of the important things that we need to go into the future is availing people, doing the best in delivery, in training of teachers, in resources, to ensure that when we are talking about schools and institutions and other forms of education, we are actually ensuring that we don't create two levels of people, those that have access to quality education and those that don't have access to quality education. If you go to many cities of the world, you will often find these places divided. Maybe the east with less quality education and the west part of the city with more quality education, with better trained teachers, less trained teachers, access to laboratories, lack of access to laboratories, etc. So quality education is actually what creates people to have the ability to contribute more. And I think innovation here is when we focus the students, because it's those students who end up coming to make any change that we aspire to achieve. Change does not come by itself. Change is made by people. And we want to eradicate the distinction that we see today between those communities that are poorly resourced and those communities that have better resources. This was very well illustrated yesterday by one of the keynote speakers. Let me give you another example. This example, I want to get it from the Marshall Islands, and I want to tell it with the story of Selena. Selena went to school, another of UWC school in Germany just a few years ago, and then she went back to her island. In 2015, while still a student at the school, she was the youngest delegate to COP21, representing her country. Selena has been self-described as a climate change warrior ever since, advocating for her country and for her people, who she says are counting on people like her. Selena is important to me because she's a credible voice about the impact of climate change on small islands, which run the risk of being swept away. And when Selena speaks about the experience that she has, you cannot but believe her. And specifically, her age represents the fact that today, as we talk, we have the highest population of young people in the world. More than 3 billion people are young people. And in developing countries, young people make more than 80% of the populations. If these people do not receive the right kind of education today, I think we are in big danger. And we are in big danger in the time of COVID, when we can see the vulnerability of the older age. We are in great danger when we also understand that today what is making us more successful is the use of technology. Many of the young people that I'm talking about were born during the days of technology, and they know nothing different from technology. And so in terms of taking us to the higher heights, it is these young people, inclusive of women. But if we look at the area of technology, if I was to give you the statistics, the gap is even larger between the women who have access to technology as knowledge and who can use it. And yet we know that if women have access, they are probably able and better to use and learn technology faster. We've seen it in women and young people especially, who learn coding just like that quite quickly. I can give you several examples of young women who have learned coding and are doing an excellent job. In the early years in the last century, when the typewriter was introduced to the world, people believed that it was such high technology that women would not learn. And what we know in the whole world, that people who have controlled the use of the typewriter have been women. So I know very well that if we want to push further the use of technology for education, we will have to include more women and address the factors that make women drop out of technology. I have seen one woman, and this example I bring from India, her name is Gayatri. Gayatri is a woman who began an organization which she calls Feminist, which she calls, in short, it is Feminist Approach to Technology. She's an engineer herself. And what she saw that was missing in her own place was the fact that young women did not have role models of other young women from such a resourceless place as the slum area where she came from. And she began to train young women to use technology and found out that even young women who had less academic education did not have the fear of technology. And even more important was the fact that their parents, who were reluctant to let their girls go to school far away, were very pleased to have her give them the kind of training that she could give, beginning from her house until she had enough resources to expand this training into other places. Now, the creativity here and the innovation is that we are not going to depend only on academic institutions, but being also able to use social movements and to use individuals who can actually expand the kind of knowledge that brings more women to the table and provide the kind of role models that women will be comfortable with. Especially women, once again, I'm putting emphasis on those women that have less access to resources or to technology itself. Educating and empowering females in the developing world has been proven to have profoundly beneficial effects on the entire communities and economies. Investing in girls is one of the most effective ways to break the pattern of poverty that is handed down from generation to generation. Countless studies show that if a girl stays in school, has access to health services, and is given opportunity to earn a dignified wage, she will marry later, have few and healthy children, and earn an income that she will invest back in her family and in her community, including ensuring that her own children, girls and boys, also go to school. And if you've, according to Christoph Nicholas and Cheryl Woodon, the UN and the World Bank first began to appreciate the potential resources that women and girls represent in the developing world in the early 1990s. Investment in girls' education may well be the highest return on investment available in the developing world. This was said by Lawrence Summer when he was the chief economist on the World Bank. The question is...
Thank you very much, Dr. Cañero, for this, for reminding us that empowering girls is very important for the society and how they will contribute. Maybe you can move on to your last closing remarks so that we have enough time later to also go through some issues that you raised during the workshops, if you don't mind.
I was actually going to my concluding sentence.
Perfect, thank you.
Concluding sentence. And my concluding sentence was simply to say, over and again, in all of the work that I have been involved in the last 3 decades, I can tell you that the best investment that one can make, both financially, in time, in talent, is the investment in women. And that will bridge and girls, and that will bridge the gender gap that we are concerned about and bring innovation that has not been on the table, because we will be welcoming people that have been missing to also bring their talents to the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cañero, and sorry for the last interruption, but really it's really very inspiring what you just said, and also reminding us about the work that still needs to be done to close the gender gap and how the challenges paving the way, but also most importantly, the power of quality education in empowering girls and learners in general and how it will benefit the society as a whole. And your remarks on innovation also resonates a lot with what today's workshop will be about. And so it's a really nice transition to our next segment that will be introduced by Kathy Kropp. So thank you once again, Dr. Cañero. Kathy Kropp, Associate Professor of Clinical Education and Rossier School of Education, will introduce the different workshops you could choose from right now. So Kathy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. And thank you as well to Musimbi Cañero for sharing your words of knowledge and inspiration to close the gender gap and advance women and girls' education. Let me also extend a warm welcome to each of you, our participants who are joining us from all around the world today. We are so grateful for your attendance at this symposium and in the upcoming workshops. Your presence and involvement today are what make these important conversations possible, so thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce the workshop segment of our agenda. Note that following the workshops, we will return to this room to hear a second exceptional keynote address by Nafisa Babu on innovating for more inclusive education systems, as well as hear key takeaways from the workshop sessions. When you return to this room in an hour, following your workshop sessions, you will use that same link that you've already used to be here today. So please continue to have that ready. And now, for the next hour, we'll be meeting in smaller groups in different Zoom rooms for our workshops. We will all transition to these rooms in a moment, but first let me say a few words about the workshop sessions today. Your workshop facilitators are all active professionals from around the world. Each is associated with the USC Rossier School of Education's Global Executive Doctor of Education program. All are engaged in one form or another in the work of fostering innovation to make education more effective, equitable, and just, as are each of you. As you can see, the 8 workshops that these leaders have designed are meant to create a collaborative space to rethink the future of education together. Whichever workshop you select, you can expect it to be engaging, interactive, and informative. Each workshop is designed around generating collaboration, courage, commitment, and creativity, those 4 C's, inviting you to offer insights and ideas based on your experience and expertise in your global context, opportunities for meaningful discussions with other workshop participants, or simply to sit back and listen. We encourage everyone here to join one, whether you are or are not in a space to turn on your video. Our facilitators and the workshops will accommodate all of you. As you can see, the workshops offered address a variety of topics critical to our global education communities in this current moment, as well as moving forward. These include leveraging virtual instruction to help foster culturally sustaining pedagogy in teacher preparation, promoting community-driven innovation, finding solutions for parents who have taken on many new responsibilities during distance learning, incorporating student voice in education to move us forward, cultivating your entrepreneurial mindset to engage in education reinvention, rethink holistic admissions in higher education to advance equity, developing social emotional skills in our students to better connect to each other globally through global platforms, and forging new ideas about what collaborations in post-secondary international partnerships could look like post-COVID-19. A common theme that runs through them all is the question of how we can innovate from this crisis toward a more just and equitable educational future. I encourage you to review the workshop titles now on the slide being shown and to decide which workshop you would like to attend. We will ask you shortly to select a workshop, and we will have you click on the link provided in the chat for that workshop so that you can easily move into your chosen workshop session. Know that whichever workshop you select, you'll be invited to think about the topic as it relates to your own context, to hear about and discuss innovative strategies and emerging ideas related to it, and importantly, to get to know some of your global colleagues here today so that you can together leave with needed skills, insights, and actions to bring back to your own education ecosystems. Coming back to this room in an hour, empowered to innovate toward equity. And with that, back to you, Audrey, for more specific instructions to help everyone easily move now into their chosen workshop rooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And we now invite all of you to click on the link of the workshops you would like to attend. So the links are posted right now on the chat, and you can also find them on the website of the event. So really, please remember the link to join the workshop is different from the link you received to join the main session. After the workshop, please remember to keep this current link so that you can come back to the main session for the final keynote. But now it's really time for you to join the workshops. My colleagues are reposting the different links. You just have to click on the link of the workshops you would like to attend. We really wish you insightful conversation. And this is a really great opportunity for you to exchange with educational stakeholders from all around the world, with peers. We'll see you back in an hour. Enjoy this moment where you will also make your voice heard, and see you very soon. So please click on the links that are on the chat. If you have any issues, you can contact us through the chat as well. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an insightful discussion and come out with next steps on how you can empower new voices and communities, but also foster partnerships to innovate towards more just and equitable education systems. While we are going to wait just for a couple of more minutes for everyone to be back in this main room, I just would like to share with you some results from the previous polls that we shared with you previously. I'm going to share them with you now, so you should be able to see them on your screen. Similar to yesterday, you're really coming from all over the world with a very short lead for North America, then Middle East, North Africa, and finally Europe. I could notice earlier in the chat that some of you mentioned you are coming from Portugal, from Eton in the UK, but also Mumbai, Accra, Uganda. So it really shows the very diverse community that we have with us today. And I hope that you really could gain from this diverse community during the workshops. In terms of education sector also, we have very diverse profiles. But as you can see, we have also a tie between elementary and secondary education and post-secondary education educators. So that's, I think, most of you. And then we also have some of you that are working in non-for-profit organization. And so that's really what we're trying to do with offering such event, is to connect different stakeholders in the field of education that will not necessarily meet or often meet, but are all and you're all working together towards offering quality education and improving access to education. And so by offering this kind of platform, we hope to foster collaboration and debate among different stakeholders in the education community. And finally, on the question, who do you think is most likely to push for education innovation in your context? There is a very clear front runner, and I think it's easy to understand because of the profile and the sectors you're all working on. And so by 46%, you're thinking that educators are going to push education innovation. So that's really interesting. And then very far behind, you have some of you who are thinking that business and private sector, but also governments could have a role to play in innovation or in innovating in education. But that's a very lower percentage. Are you surprised by those results? Please comment on the chats. We want to hear what are your thoughts, and also if you want to keep sharing where you're from, or if you want to share any takeaways from the workshop, please, the chat is here to be used. But you can also keep using our social media, using hashtag equity in education as you tweet. And our handles are at wise_tweets or at USC Rossier. So we really encourage you to share the takeaways, thoughts about the keynotes. We want to be hearing your voice since we are not able to hear it in person. Finally, before we move on to the last keynote of the event, I would like to remind you that the call for application for the WISE Awards is open until December 20th. And for that, I would like us to watch a short video to learn more about this initiative that spots and celebrates innovative projects in education globally.
Are you working on an education project that is transforming people's lives? Is it benefiting your community? Is it a model that can inspire others? Each year, the WISE Awards celebrate 6 groundbreaking education projects for their excellence and share them with the world. Apply for the 2021 WISE Awards. WISE, an initiative of Qatar Foundation.
So we really encourage you to spread the word in your network, but also to apply and to nominate any interesting and innovative project that is creating impact in their own context. For our next segment and the last segment of the day, I have the pleasure to welcome Nafisa Babu, Director of Inclusive Education for Light for the World. Over the 12 past years, Nafisa has used her life experience as a person with a disability, along with her professional qualification, to research and advise on inclusive education policy and practices, advocate for the rights of children with disabilities, and train teachers, education officials, and communities on aspects of inclusive education. And tonight, Nafisa is going to be sharing with us some of the learnings and insights that she's been learning throughout the years. And Nafisa, we are really looking forward to your remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Audrey. And it's really exciting to see all the diversity on this conference of people from all over the world. It's really great to see to be in such good company. So, you know, this year, 2020, was actually meant to be the year of inclusive education, because the Global Education Monitoring Report was spotlighting inclusion in education. And, you know, activists like myself have been pushing for this for years and years, because I remember when a while back, about 5 years ago, the GEM report would only mention disability once and say about how there wasn't enough data. So, you know, this is something we were really looking forward to, activists like myself. But in the spirit of Winston Churchill, who said, you should never let a good crisis go to waste, we really used this time to bring attention to the widening inequity that was created by the COVID pandemic, and bring attention to the additional challenges that children with disabilities and those who are generally left behind are facing, and also then bring forward some solutions that could really bring an added value, not just now, but in the future, such as technology, good teaching, and the importance of the whole family community connection. So, you know, the disruptions in education has exacerbated long-standing inequities. So, and I think one of them is poverty. Poverty is so pervasive. It pulls back people from reaching their full potential. And even in the wealthiest countries, we know that support to girls and boys with disabilities was not really adequate. They were often sidelined because it was too much effort or too costly, right? Well, in low and middle income countries, about 40% of countries actually opted for, 40% of countries did not actually look at supporting learners at risk of exclusion. And this is really worrying. Technology has immense potential, but it also became quite obvious, the massive digital divide. More than half of low and middle income countries opted for using online distance learning, even though 12% of households do not have internet, many do not have access to electricity or even the devices. And in Ethiopia, a country that Light for the World works in quite a lot, among the poorest 20% of households, just 7% owned a radio or owned a TV, and none owned a TV. Many countries also opted for providing either interactive radio, which was very successful during the Ebola outbreaks in Liberia and other countries, and Sierra Leone, and TV teaching to support students. But they also really emphasize on supporting students who were either completing their secondary education or primary education, meaning that lots of the first graders or the children in those foundation years were neglected. And this is really worrying, right, if you think about it, because they will have that shaky foundation from the start. And school closures really highlighted that our systems often overlook this younger group of children. So my colleague spoke to a girl, Sophia, who's 6 years old with a physical disability in Sofala province, where that really was struck quite severely by Cyclone Ida. And she was so excited about going to school this year. It was the first year at school. And one of the things she mentioned was that, you know, her mom was unable to really help her with her schoolwork because she didn't know how to read or write. And her work was in Portuguese, not the local language. So another area of our issue in our education system was highlighted. Some of the things that really need to be, the system issues that we are often overlooking, like the language of instruction not necessarily being the language the home language of children, and forgetting about what kind of supports a child generally has at home, especially in poorer communities. So, the situation, we also often forget that schools were safe havens for children who came from abusive families. They were often the place where children got their first nutritious meal, or only nutritious meal for the day. And a place where children got healthcare, right? Got their vision screens, got deworming medication. But these things were all stopped during the lockdown. So the situation was grave. And I think the Minister of Sierra Leone, former Minister of Sierra Leone, George Werner, said something that I feel it's something we should bring into this conference and remember. He said, schools closing during this crisis to close schools during a crisis like this is to ask our youngest generation to make a tremendous sacrifice on behalf of their elders. The way to honor that sacrifice when the coronavirus crisis abates is to put education reform at the heart of recovery. We owe them nothing less. And I think this is really important moving forward. So, what changes can we make to help education systems emerge stronger? Agile education systems can rapidly respond to humanitarian crises, emergencies, and health crises. And that's what we really need. And these kinds of systems will be innately inclusive as it will put in place measures that will reach the children who are the hardest to reach, right? So I've seen some of the most creative solutions emerge in some of the poorest countries in the world. And some of these positive initiatives, I think I'll mention some of them for us to draw inspiration from and think of ways to scale up or do more of. For example, fast-tracking the use of access to technology and accessible publishing. So for us in Burkina Faso, for a long time, we've been trying to get the electronic versions of textbooks to support children who are blind and partially sighted, and just in general who are print disabled. But this was not really possible because the government didn't have it. But now, with the COVID pandemic and distance education, the government is looking at adding textbooks on their website to support students' learning. Another example is from Ethiopia, where students' textbooks were put on mega voice devices, which is like an audio output device, costs $40, also can be charged by solar energy. So these are really great solutions that could be used now and in the future as well, because it's also quite environmentally friendly. It's always baffled me in the past that, it is so easy to get a child who is with cerebral palsy or disability, a wheelchair, or blind child, a white cane. But when you ask for a tablet, it is always a massive issue because it's seen as a luxury device, right? But in reality, these tablets and technology could be the voice for a nonverbal child, and for a child who is deaf, a way of actually developing their sign language. So thanks to the drive and the use of technology that has been brought on by the COVID pandemic, in some of the poorest countries, the door is now open to procure some of these tablets, laptops, and audio output devices, which means children with disabilities could in the future have better access to the curriculum, better than they've ever had before. So if there is enough investment in further, and this is further scaled up. So I've also seen great examples of organizations and leveraging the capabilities of universally available devices such as mobile phones. In Ethiopia, Pakistan, South Africa, teachers were using Telegram and WhatsApp to send stories to students, curriculum material over WhatsApp, create discussion groups about different topics. And I thought this was really interesting and exciting. And I think I mentioned also before about the interactive radio, which I really think should continue to reinforce students' learning, because we know that children miss out on school because they're either sick. In the countries that we work in, there are often floods. And so for days they would miss out on school, or there's education, there's civil unrest. So we should really continue using this to reinforce learning as supplementary, to supplement learning. and also it also helps to create a better connection between parents and the child, because they are getting the work directly to the teacher can get the work directly to the parent. We also need to strengthen linkages in the communities and families even more. And this means going beyond what we normally look at, school governing bodies, but make that human connection between a teacher at school and the teacher at home, which is the parent, right? And this will help to cultivate a more conducive environment. So in Pakistan, they tried to gather community volunteers who were either parents or youth youth who were unemployed but had graduated from university, and they were going around to homes to using, of course, protective gear and social distancing to motivate and encourage children to learn and prepare to help parents also deal with negative behavior or challenging behavior, to motivate them and all of those things. And they use a great blend of community approaches with technology by sharing stories and, like I said, also positive parenting tips. And those positive parenting tips really go a long way, because lots of parents aren't aware of how to motivate your child. So things like setting up a reward system, how to encourage more of a growth mindset, or some of the strategies that they use to keep students engaged and parents motivated to engage their children in learning in a very difficult time. It is also a really good time to draw support from communities and parents and youth to address gaps in learning that is often spoken about. We hear about this learning crisis, and they've also, organizations like ITA in Pakistan, use this opportunity to also determine literacy levels and numeracy levels of children in the community. And this is really important, because then you are able to, once you know that, you are able to engage and the rest of the community to advocate for better education. And also, it's also a great foundation for setting up systems like teaching to the level of the learner, which is a very important remedial and inclusive approach, which will be needed for catch-up classes in the future. I think another important lesson learned through by this COVID pandemic is the importance of education to be not just about literacy and numeracy, but also the importance of learning about developing socio-emotional learning and resilience. And I think that's been I think it's been amplified now. And I felt it was really important and something that should be continued, because post this pandemic, there will be a lot of economic fallout and parents dealing with stress in the household. So it's important that we also develop a growth mindset and resilience in children and stress that importance amongst family members as well. So those of you who have been homeschooling, I'm sure there are a few of you among us. I'm sure you are appreciating teachers and your child's teacher even more. But one thing we see and know is that teachers need more training to be inclusive teachers, to meet the diversity in the classroom. And also they need better work conditions and salary. In Sub-Saharan Africa has the greatest shortage of teachers, and countries will fall further behind in actually getting the good quota of teachers, the workforce required to deliver inclusive education, because of looming debt crisis. So we are in real danger that we will not have the resources to supply teachers and upskill teachers in inclusive education. So there's only 10 years left to go before 2030. And I think we should really use the COVID-19 education crisis to build back better. Teachers need training in skills like teaching to the level of the learner, which is a good learning center of inclusive pedagogy that benefits all students. And let's also be realistic. We need more teachers if we are going to set up catch-up classes, which include girls and boys with disabilities. But at the moment, billions of dollars are lost to education due to harmful tax incentives, and debt servicing. So governments need these funds, like I said, to recruit teachers, deploy teachers, and support and support staff such as speech therapists, in order to achieve SDG 4. Another important reminder brought on by the pandemic is the critical role that social systems play in realizing rights of children, particularly the most vulnerable. You know, we need ministries of health, social welfare, public works, and other ministries to work together, and more important, the ministries of finance, to really not fall down on their commitment to education as moving forward. So this is one of the reasons we are asking governments, and we should all join forces in asking governments to safeguard education financing and invest more in education moving forward. We need to increase the size of the budget, the overall budget, and that can be done through progressive taxation, right? We need to make sure that governments spend at least 20% of their budget and 6% of their GDP on education. We need to make sure that, that we address issues around debt by cancelling debt. We also need to make sure that funds are allocated to those who need it the most, equitable finance. And that means as donor governments are also implementing austerity measures, that they do not fall short of their commitment to education, because it's now more than ever that we need financing for education. So lastly, this is something I personally live by. You know, it's a saying by, a quote by Kenneth Blanchard. There's a difference between interest and commitment. When you're interested in doing something, you do it only because it's convenient. When you're committed to something, you accept no excuses, only results. So my challenge to you and all the WISE conference participants here is to renew your commitment to education for all and leaving no one behind by finding your own unique contribution to rebuilding a more just and equitable educational future for all.
Thank you so much, Nafisa, for your very insightful speech. And also thank you for sharing some silver linings from the COVID pandemic and how some innovation have emerged and been scaled during the time of crisis to make education more inclusive. As you mentioned, a lot of work still lies ahead to make our education system more inclusive, and it will require the contribution of everyone, educators, government, funders. And I think it really summarized well this event. Innovating and rethinking education system is not a one-man job. We need to build coalitions and foster collaboration to achieve SDG 4 by 2030. So really, thank you very much, Nafisa, for reminding us this, and it's very important takeaway from this conference. While I'm leaving you with Mark Robinson, Chair of Global Executive Director of Education Program of the USC Rossier School of Education, for some closing remarks, but also to share some takeaways from the workshops, I would like to invite all of you to continue the conversation online. I would like to thank the audience who have joined us from all over the world. And also I would like to thank my colleagues from the WISE team and the USC team who have been associated in putting together this great event. Mark, the floor is yours to end this event.
Well, thank you, Audrey. I'm pleased to do that. My job is to summarize and to synthesize across what we've heard. And so I want to kind of pull some of these strands together. As you know, we started yesterday and we started today with those 4 C's: courage, commitment, collaboration, and creativity. And creativity was really the centerpiece for today as we focused on innovation and the ways that we can transform education. In our first keynote with Nusimbi Kanyoro, she really started with that emphasis on the different ways that education operates and the different places that we can affect that change. That education is informal and formal, secular and religious. It happens in schools and communities. And I think we really saw those themes throughout the day in the workshops and in Nafisa Babu's address just now. So that notion of the solution that Musembi Kanyoro shared, that we have to create in people the ability to contribute more, is really central to finding solutions in the pandemic. We saw from the poll results that all of you and the participants really highlighted the importance of educators at all levels in pushing innovation in education. And we even saw in the chat a theme included in a comment from Margarita Mansala, where she said that a lot of us attending this event are like-minded educators, and what we need to do is persuade the people who don't yet share this view of the future. And that's such a crucial idea. So in Nafisa Babu's remarks, she focused on, of course, as we all have, the widening inequities due to the pandemic, but she called out 3 solutions: technology, teaching, and the importance of connections and family in particular. And that really came across in the workshops. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we heard in the workshops, but break it down into those categories of technology, teaching, and then family and community connections. In terms of technology, some of the takeaways from the workshops were that we need to innovate in our online tools for teaching and also in the way we evaluate learning. We need to leverage social media in that kind of connectivity. And in doing so, we need to get all the participants to a comfort level with that technology: the students themselves, the educators, their families, and their communities. And ultimately, that's going to lead to less reliance on physical presence. And that's in the learning we do and in the connections and the collaborations we have. So those were some takeaways in teaching, in technology. In teaching, there were a lot of great ideas that came out. Part of it was to use storytelling and to really find ways to get people to share their stories and to think in those narrative forms, because they connect so deeply and well with people. Another is to leverage the students' voices themselves, to really empower students to have agency in their own learning, to have a voice in what that learning is and how their schools work, and to get parents to be the advocates of that and to really support that notion. We also heard about the need to infuse global perspectives into domestic settings and classrooms. That came from a session on partnerships that cross borders, which are particularly challenged now. But I think it's broadly applicable to our classrooms at all levels. As we're in this period of isolation and there's less travel, how do we instill that kind of understanding and perspective in learners of all levels, and to find a way to do that without being so reliant on physical presence? And we learned in one of the workshops about the need to teach social awareness and self-awareness. This need for people to really be aware of their own perspective and others' perspectives, and to find learning in that. And then the last of these, we heard about technology and teaching, but also community and family were crucial in what we heard in the workshops and in the plenary sessions. And so some of the takeaways for that were that we really need to include the voices of parents and community members in our conversations as educators, in schools, at universities, in the classroom. Find a way to integrate parents and families and community members. We need to find ways to bridge the school to home gap, and do that through technology, do that through innovation in the way we do schooling, and include that in our school funding to find ways to bridge that school to home gap. We need to open people up to multiple pathways of innovation. So it's partly about their mindsets, that they need to be open to that. And that openness needs to exist in communities and in households as well. And so we need to find ways to promote that. And lastly, one of the takeaways from a workshop was that many innovations already exist in our communities. And it's a question of identifying those, connecting them to the schools and the learning, and leveraging those. And I think that's really, really, really inspirational. So I'll wrap things up with a few words of thanks and then a final thought. Firstly, thank you to all of our keynote speakers, Dr. Pedro Noguera, Selma Morea, Musembi Kanyoro, and Nafisa Babu. We really are deeply grateful for these perspectives that came from North America, South America, Africa, just fascinating insights. I want to thank our colleagues at WISE, especially our alumna and friend, Dr. Amina Hussein, but also Audrey Jacomini and Aurelio Amaral, who have been just fantastic collaborators on this. I want to thank Dr. Sabrina Chong, Director of the Global Executive EDD, for her leadership throughout this process, making these events today and yesterday possible, and running all of the technology for this with her team. And of course, Professor Kathy Kropp and Professor Rob Philback for their leadership. The students that led these workshops, the doctoral students, are in courses taught by Dr. Kropp and Dr. Philback. And they, along with our group of our alumni who served as coaches and co-facilitators, really made these workshops and this whole event possible. So thank you to the students and the alumni as well. And I'll just end with what we just heard from Nafisa a few minutes ago, this notion of let's use this crisis to build back better. And I think that's, if anything, that needs to be the challenge that we all pick up as educators. So thank you all for joining us today and yesterday. We're very grateful for your presence. We hope to hear from you in the future, and hopefully it's our intention to pull all the takeaways from these sessions together into a publication, and we'll let you know when that happens. In the meantime, have a great morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.